vaccine, just generally that happens too. The point is, there is a possibility, and as we age, that possibility increases of transient ischemic attacks. So within few minutes of the transient ischemic attacks, if methylene blue is given, methylene blue would prevent or reduce this particular mechanism and prevent the neurons from dying. If we can save the neurons from dying, then soon afterwards, as the repairs happen, as the blood supply restores to the tissue can actually have a chance to stay okay. So here, if the tissue has already died, then giving it blood again will do nothing. Those dead neurons will just be removed. And now we have a tissue damage, which is permanent. On the other hand, if we can prevent them from dying, then we have a chance of protecting them. This is the neuroprotective behavior of methylene blue during a transient ischemic event. And the authors in the study, let me quickly show you the study. Here, the authors in the study, so the study is the effect of methylene blue on autophagy and apoptosis in MRI-defined normal tissue, ischemic penumbra, and ischemic core. And this, at the end of this, they say something that was really interesting. I had to read this all today, and it is actually fun to read this one.
It's actually a really good article.
Here they said, a unique advantage of methylene blue is that it could, in principle, be administered on site by emergency responders, which could potentially benefit a larger acute stroke patient population. What they're saying is, if the methylene blue is carried by the emergency responders, and they administer that as soon as somebody has the stroke, they can potentially protect a lot of people's brain tissue injury, or the extent of the injury. It almost seems to me as if to have a tiny methylene blues bottle always in our pockets. And if we feel that there is or the EMTs should know that the pocket has the methylene blue, they can use that. So anyways, going back here, this is how important this discussion is. So first mechanism, methylene blue helps prevent or reduce apoptosis. Good. Second mechanism, methylene blue also enhances autophagy. This is a very interesting behavior of methylene blue. So think about it for a second. In an ischemic insulted tissue, the tissue's behavior is to just die. Here we are telling the tissue that, hey man, don't die. Hey you little cells, don't die. Survive, do not commit suicide, and also clean up your internal trash that has become produced as a result of the insult. Normally neurons do the opposite. They die and they don't clean up inside. Methylene blue helps them reverse it. Number one, it protects them from dying, and number two, it triggers autophagy in them so they can clean up their internals. It's a homeostatic mechanism, autophagy. It is protective. So look at how methylene blue does that. So once again, the same mechanism, the beginning is the same. Methylene blue reduces the activation of P53. When the P53 activation is reduced, that causes the AMPK to be reduced as well. That is another enzyme. And this enzyme, AMPK, can also be modulated with the administration of AMP, which can normally occur when there is less oxygen. So if there is less oxygen or less nutrition, then we make less ATP, and that results in more AMP, because adenosine triphosphate is made from adenosine monophosphate. So there is adenosine monophosphate that becomes adenosine tri.
No beam. Had a little technical difficulty. But this is what's fascinating, because they're talking about a TIA, a transischemic, a stroke. But when you look at the cytochrome oxidase in the brain, they're actually doing studies where they can hook up kind of a monitor to the forehead, and it uses infrared light to be able to pick up on the amount of cytochrome oxidase in the brain. And the lower that cytochrome oxidase is, the increased risk of having dementia or Alzheimer's, and it's not the beta amyloid plaque deposition. That's actually shown to be neuroprotective. It's not a cause. It's an effect of decreased mitochondrial function, increased free radical production, and a decrease in the efficiency of the electron transport chain. That's what methylene blue does. It creates a redox reaction, which is fascinating because it just keeps like donating and donating and donating. So all of these reactive oxygen species, it's like, nope, let's make water. So it's donating to take something that's inflammatory and it makes water out of it and increases the mitochondria's ability, that its energy to be able to make, it's energy to make more ATP. And it's just mind-blowing. If they would have given methylene blue for pneumonias, holy cow. Like, I had to figure out just almost like backwoods medicine on some people for their complex pneumonias. It was nuts. And not that I would have been doing like methylene blue IVs. I was barely keeping up with anyways, but like even taking it orally, like low dose, to ramp up that redox reaction, like so cool.
Plus, adenosine triphosphate is made from adenosine monophosphate. So there is adenosine monophosphate, that becomes adenosine diphosphate, that becomes adenosine triphosphate. So when there is adenosine monophosphate reduced as a result of reduced p53, that causes another enzyme called TSC2 to increase, which then causes mTOR to reduce. mTOR is the mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR. What is the importance of mTOR? mTOR prevents autophagy. It is a switch. Dr. Paul Merrick was talking about it yesterday as well. mTOR is a switch which prevents the cell from autophagy. So you might say, what's wrong with the mTOR? Why does it do that? Well, the mTOR decides that within a cell, what should be happening? Should the cell be cleaning up, or should the cell be eating? So imagine that there is someone in our home who orders us every day to say, time to clean versus time to work. When we are working, for example, let's say we are cooking something, then it's not necessary that as you're cooking, you're cleaning as well. Although whenever I'm cooking, I clean with it, and it's kind of my, I think I have an OCD for that. So anyways, when you're cooking, maybe you don't want to clean up right away. Then when you stop cooking, then you start cleaning. mTOR is that part, that enzyme. If there is insulin present, if there is glucose present, that means the cell is receiving nutrition, and cell should stop cleaning and receive the nutrition, store it, put it somewhere, and then when it is free, that means there is no more glucose, or there is less glucose and less insulin, now the cell is free, then it should do the cleaning up.
And that's why intermittent that's not why. That's one of the reasons intermittent fasting is so important.
mTOR decides when the autophagy will be triggered. So if you decide for mTOR, if you say, you know what, mTOR, I'm going to make you stop. And when mTOR stops, autophagy starts. Imagine mTOR is someone sitting in our home, continuously saying, don't do cleanup, just keep working. Don't do cleanup, just keep working. And that is what mTOR does. If you go to mTOR and say, you mTOR, you stop, then mTOR will not say that don't do cleanup. And as soon as it stops saying that, then the cleanup would start. Methylene blue causes mTOR to stop. And when the mTOR becomes reduced in its action, autophagy starts, and we want a neuron that is under stress. We want it to do autophagy to clean up the trash from within itself. So what a beautiful mechanism. On one end, it prevented the neuron from dying. It protects us from losing a neuron forever. Secondly, it triggers the cleaning up within the neuron. A neuron under stress has lots of trash piling up inside.
But
heat shock proteins are being produced.
Hold on. Yeah. But like what I was saying between beta amyloid plaque deposition and tau enzyme, the beta amyloid is on the outside, tau is in the inside of the cell. So if you have that misfolding protein, so if you've got tau inside the cell, from everything I've looked at, that's it. It's a ghost cell. It's dead. Like, it's there, but it's dead. It cannot be regenerated. Like, at that point, with that misfolding, it doesn't matter how much oxygen is donated to it. It simply cannot be resurrected, if you will. And so that's where, even in this context, in my opinion, which is useless for any type of scientific standard, but that's where the methylene blue is so important, because it's not going to resurrect that cell. But if you can boost the cytochrome oxidase and increase not just the efficiency, but the scope at which the mechanisms of electron transport, of energy production, like the scope at which methylene blue creates that redox where it's able to just keep turning reactive oxygen species into water, like that's incredible. I mean, like yay methylene blue, it's so amazing. Just giddy up.
And methylene blue would help trigger that mechanism to clean up the neuron. Beautiful.
Oh,
this is
well,
like methylene blue goes in and kisses
as
the
it's not
neurons to
dead.
say you stay alive and you stay happy and healthy. Okay, then. And if you read some of the comments under methylene blue, many people are claiming, and so this is not a study, although studies show that as well. Many people say that, hey, my cognition becomes fast, improved. I can find words quickly. I can react quickly. I can think quickly. So methylene blue, low dose, 5 milligram total in a day, or even 10 milligram total in a day. 1% solution of methylene blue is magical, with all those side effects and contraindications that we discussed already. Now, final effect of methylene blue, that is actually published at FLCCC platform, I think yesterday. So that is the long story short for Dr. Bean. If you find that on YouTube, the latest video that I did was methylene blue and its effect on mitochondria. I'm going to give you a quick summary of that. Now we are going to go in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. When a mitochondria is under stress, imagine the whole cell is under stress, and then of course the mitochondria that is living inside the cell is also under stress. When the mitochondria is under stress, what it does is the following. It starts releasing the components, its own components, out in the environment. That is a signal from the mitochondria to say, I am under stress, and that allows the cell to perform apoptosis and die. Even if those components are not causing apoptosis, if they are released from the cell to the outside environment, then the immune system cells will kill the cell. So remember, mitochondria is a very important component, not only for energy production and not only for keeping inflammation at bay, but also to give a signal to immune system to kill the cell or not. So how does methylene blue help in this whole situation? When a mitochondria is functioning, I have made this little diagram here, let me show you. What happens is, mitochondria's function is to make ATP. To do that, what it does is, it has a bunch of
that's way more than
on
that.
its inner membrane. And I have discussed that all in a separate talk, so I don't want to take your time there. There is an electron transport chain. That electron transport chain has multiple enzymes in it. We call them complex 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there is a fifth complex that is called ATP synthase that makes the ATP. Normally, electron transport chain is separate and ATP synthase are separate. They are together called the phosphorylation mechanism. The details. Here, what is important is this. The complex 1, an enzyme inside the mitochondria.
And I haven't seen this video, but complex 1 and complex 3, what happens between those, and the efficiency with which it's able to produce energy would be like a car, like a 12-cylinder car, whatever, 8-cylinder, and you take a couple cylinders out, and you're still going to get from point A to point B, but it's going to be a really crappy ride. You're just saying, I mean, it's just going to be embarrassing. And we want it to be clean. We want there to be this efficient production of energy with the least amount of reactive oxygen species or free radicals produced and released from complex 1 and complex 3. And let's see what he
receives an electron from NADH. This is why NADH is very important. It receives an electron from NADH. Similarly, another complex called complex 2 receives an electron from FADH2. These electrons then are transferred to complex 3. Complex 3 then transfers them to complex 4. So you would say, what the heck are they doing? Just transferring the electron? Actually, what happens is within their own structure, they move electron from site to site within them, and they harvest energy from the electron's movement. So they're not just doing it because they're playing ball. They are doing this because they're extracting energy from electron as electron is moving. And finally, when the electron reaches the complex 4 enzyme puts that electron on oxygen and makes water. So of course, oxygen is very important. If oxygen is not there, we cannot make water, and now the electron chain is disrupted, and the mitochondria will be disrupted. So imagine if there is ischemic injury to the brain tissue, there is less oxygen available to the tissue cells or neurons, and this electron transport chain has become a problem because it is not running, it doesn't have oxygen or has low oxygen. Second thing, the complex number 3 is the primary place where reactive oxygen species are made, ROS are made.
Yep.
Now, normally a cell makes anywhere from 0.5% to 4% of the electrons get converted in ROS, reactive oxygen species. These reactive oxygen species are actually useful. They do a lot of good things within the cell, but if that percentage increases, then those little bombs, the reactive oxygen species, they will go and they will just denature the lipids, and they would cause the cell membranes to be destroyed, and they will cause the membrane of other organelle within the cell to be destroyed. They can essentially destroy the whole cell. This is like having a fire erupt inside a house that would just blast the whole house out. We don't want that. But when the mitochondria is disrupted, then the complex 3 can continue to make more reactive oxygen species, while complex 4 is not using those electrons to make water with the oxygen, and now we have ample and more than ample or excessive amounts of reactive oxygen species produced, which cause lots of damage. Guess what methylene blue does? I think after this talk, you will pick up methylene blue and kiss it. So what methylene blue does, it is an electron cycler. It can donate an electron to the complex 4, even if the remaining parts are not working. It can actually donate electron to all parts. And it can receive an electron as well. So if there is less oxygen, there is no one to receive the final electron, then methylene blue can raise its hand and say,
I'll give it to you.
I will receive it for you. Is I need electrons to function. Methylene blue would raise its hand and say, I can give you an electron. It is an electron donor and acceptor. It is a redox molecule. It is an electron cycler.
Yay!
So electron transport chain.
That's the biggest thing. It's a cycler, right? And that's the problem if somebody's taking too much methylene blue, it can actually shut that process down. And that's where, like, doing low dose methylene blue, but I love that he used that it's a cycler, because it can donate and receive those electrons, or it's just a beautiful thing.
That is in shambles because there is less oxygen and there is less nutrition, there is less NADH, there is less FADH2. The mitochondria is dying. Methylene blue comes in there and says, I'll do this, I'll give you electrons. And if you want to give them back to me, I'll take them. So it reduces, so it kickstarts the mitochondrial function, which is very important, because when the mitochondria would start functioning correctly, it would start making ATP. And that is an energy enhancing mechanism of methylene blue. And production of ATP tells the cell in which this mitochondria is. When the mitochondria is making ATP, that tells the cell that, hey, everything is good. And the cell decides not to cause apoptosis. What a beautiful mechanism, right? So energy enhancing mechanism. Also antioxidant, because it can take electrons and it can give electrons and it can make the electron transport chain to work correctly, and that would become antioxidant. So when methylene blue is present, mitochondrial function is restored, mitochondria stops spilling these signals, and inflammatory behavior is reduced. Not only of this cell, but the surrounding immune cells. That means damage to the tissue is reduced. And this is what they saw in the study. That is a mouse study. But they saw that those mice that were given methylene blue right in the beginning of the brain injury, they had smaller areas of infarction. They had smaller area of damage compared to those that were not given methylene blue. So, more actions. This is also a very interesting action. Methylene.
I was going to stop it, but this last part I think is so critical on so many levels, and I'm going to have to do a specific talk on why so many people are deficient of nitric oxide, and it's how we breathe. And there's certain aspects about it that are easy-ish to fix. And it's simply how we breathe and how we create nitric oxide. This is the first time I've seen this video, but I went ahead about a minute and I heard him talking about nitric oxide, and he's absolutely spot on. And the easiest way to convert the air we breathe in to nitric oxide is, or the only way, if you will, is to breathe through our nose. So if you've got a deviated septum, if you have chronic sinus infections or inflammation or mold exposure or had a tongue tie that wasn't released, or had teeth removed to make room for your adult teeth and needed braces, or a palatal expander, your nasal sinus passages didn't have the ability to actually to form properly. So you have narrowed nasal passages, so you're more likely to be a mouth breather, which is hugely problematic because, well, I mean, on like 18 different levels. But I want to hear what Mobeen says, because he's brilliant, and I love how eloquently he says this stuff about nitric oxide.
So, more actions. This is also a very interesting action. Methylene Blue works with the complex 4 to help produce more nitric oxide. This is the last part, and then we stop. What is this about? So what happens is, when a mitochondria, which is responsible to work with oxygen and nutrition, right? When it finds that there is less oxygen, when it cannot make enough water, and that mitochondria in normal situations helps produce more nitric oxide. Why did I say helps produce more nitric oxide? Some literature says mitochondria actually produces nitric oxide by the complex 4's function. And some literature says that the complex 4's function is to consume nitric oxide to reduce the amount of nitric oxide present in the environment. So let's just say this much. When there is less oxygen, the mitochondrial function becomes to increase nitric oxide. When the nitric oxide is present more, that would cause the blood vessels to dilate. We have done this discussion. Nitric oxide dilates blood vessels. When the blood vessel is dilated, there is more glucose that will come in. There is more oxygen that would come in. There is more blood flow that would take the trash away as well. The tissue would start healing and repairing. Guess what Methylene Blue does? This is why Methylene Blue is called the jack of all trades. What it does is, Methylene Blue consumes oxygen and converts that into water without the help of complex 4, which causes complex 4 to start making more nitric oxide, which causes vasodilatation, which causes more glucose and oxygen to start flowing in and more trash to start flowing out. So the avid medical professionals who are here will be thinking, well, shouldn't that cause reperfusion injury? So what happens is that when an area, a tissue, is under stress because of ischemia or because of less blood flow or oxygen or nutritional supply problems, when you give it normal flow of oxygen and blood and nutrition, then that extra nutrition that come in, that causes the mitochondria to start running fast, which causes more reactive oxygen species, and that causes even more insult to the tissue. That is called a reperfusion injury. Guess what Methylene Blue does? Because it is sitting in the mitochondria and keeping the reins of mitochondria correct, because it can receive the electrons, it actually protects from the reperfusion injury by reducing the production of reactive oxygen species. So this study showed that not only it helped dilate the blood vessels and increase the cerebral blood flow, it also reduced the reperfusion injury. So it is such a beautiful molecule that says, you know what, bring the blood in, open the floodgates. And I know that this is going to cause damage, so I am standing here to not let the damage occur. What a beautiful thing. A little molecule.
Methylene Blue. Who knew? It's so awesome.